I'll let Elise can take care of that. Okay, awesome. So before I introduce this evening's guests, I want to offer a land acknowledgement on behalf of the planning community and Glendale Community College. Every community owes its existence and vitality to generations from around the world who have contributed their hopes, their dreams, and their energy to making the history that led to this moment. Some were brought here against their will, some were drawn to leave their distant homes in hope of a better life, and some have lived on this land for more generations than can be counted. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connection across all barriers of heritage and difference. We begin this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. We are currently occupying ancestral land of the Tongva people. In our work to promote social justice and education, we must always consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that brings us here together today. With that being said, I'd like to welcome everyone to our second event, recognizing Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. As you may know, this week's activities celebrate Asian Pacific Islander and Desi American history, and we are honored to have several activists who have personal experiences being on the ground advocating for various efforts for the Asian American community. We are joined today by Mo Nishida, who has been around since the 1960s and has participated in the repeal of Title II of the Walter McCarran Act, the concentration camp provision of the act, supporting the Alcatraz occupation of Native peoples. He was also part of the Los Angeles-based Asian American Hardcore and staffed the Asian Involvement Office of the Japanese American Community Services. He was a member of the East Wind Cadre organization while living in the Community Workers Collective in Boyle Heights in the 1970s. Presently, Mo is retired from work and participates in the 29th running of the 250-mile Little Tokyo to Manzanar Spiritual Unity and Prayer Run, which I think he is nearly came back from. I think he might be on his way back, and participates in the national class struggle of the Kiro umbrella of care disaster of our senior citizens elder care program. We are also joined by Eddie Wong, who has been a longtime activist and media artist in the Asian American movement. He was one of the founders of the UCLA Asian American Studies Center, co-edited Roots, an Asian American Reader, and co-founded Visual Communications. He is retired and stays busy editing and writing for East Wind Easy. Last but not least, we're also joined by Joe Zhu, who is genderqueer, non-binary, and has pronouns of they, them. They are an abolitionist and a volunteer organizer at the Chinatown Community for Equitable Development. Joe grew up in Shenzhen, China, and migrated to the United States, where they were 18 to study English literature at Wesleyan University. Since joining CCED in 2019, they have been fighting for Hillside Villa tenants to preserve affordable housing via eminent domain, as well as for better vaccine access for Chinatown's elderly tenants. Lastly, we're also joined by Richard Kamei, Department Chair of Sociology, Assistant Chair for the Social Sciences Division, and Professor of Sociology, who will facilitate today's discussion. I'd like to now take the moment to hand it over to Richard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Thank you all for being here. I've been excited about this event for a couple months now, and it's finally here. So we're going to begin by having our panelists introduce themselves in alphabetical order. So it'll be Mo, Nishida, Eddie Wong, and Joe Zhou. And we'll have them discuss how and why they became activists. And then I will be asking the panelists some questions, but they especially want to hear questions and comments from the audience. So please place your questions and comments, as Kevin said, into the chat box throughout the event, and I will be looking out for them. And so starting with Mo, could you please briefly introduce yourself and then discuss how and why you became an activist?
Okay, my name is Mo Nishida. Mo is a nickname. It's a short for Moritsugu. Pretty hard to pronounce that, so my homies in the high school shortened it up as much as they could. I'm 84 years old. So I grew up, I'm a child of the American concentration camp survivor. And what that all implicates, right? All that post-traumatic stress stuff that we're beginning to get a handle on or understand more. So that those of us who went through camp took a pretty good whammy. So, and having to overcome all of that, growing up in on the west side, that's the old St. Anne area, and having multicultural friends, mainly African American. So during the civil rights era, Buddha heads were, that's a term for Japanese, but Buddha heads were questioned by their friends, right? What side are you on? You can't sit up there on the sidelines and watch it on television, right? You gotta tell us what's going on with you. And so that way, a lot of us began to question it, and what we saw, right, had to do with it. That affected a lot of people, right? A lot of us, right? The Emmett Till killing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how do you deal with another human being like that? The integration of the schools, right, taking place in the 50s. The Korean War had gone; it was over. But anyhow, all of this stuff was going on at the time, and we had to answer to our friends and to ourselves, right? Our own conscience. And of course, in our community, there was this whole thing about don't speak up, don't make waves, don't stick out, and be safe. Well, all communities always have a kind of a Mustang trend in there. There's a bunch of people that not going for that kind of stuff. And I guess I was kind of lucky. I hung out with guys that were pretty independent. So we formed a group in high school called the Constituents, and we kind of raised hell for a while. But we were always clear about who and what we were in terms of the turf that we defended, right? We were West Side guys, a long tradition of Buddha head gangs, right, defending our turf. So, other communities had their gangs too, right? But yeah, I did, and when I was in school, I went to my first demonstration when saw the Bull Connor, right, taking his troops, right, been on horseback, dogs, all of that, and chasing folks at that Pettus Bridge, right, St. Martin, and them. So, yeah, and then I graduated from college, and then I went looking for a job, and there was no work around for people like myself. And then the civil rights movement came west, and I was told by good people, African Americans, that went to go support and help them, right? When they said that, hey, look in the mirror, brother, right? You ain't white. Check it out. Check your own community out, man. See what the hell's going on. And so I did. And at that time, right, the people, our elders and the leaders of our community were saying, it's okay. We take care of our own. We don't have any problems, right? We're cool. We're who's that fat cat in San Francisco State? Hayakawa was talking about we're the model minority, right? Mm-hmm. Well, when I had a chance to investigate what the hell was going on, I just had to go down to Little Tokyo, right? And saw all the contradictions that were facing our people right there. Right? We didn't take care of our elders. I was had one foot in the drug culture, drug and alcohol culture. No goddamn well they weren't taking care of our young people that were getting into trouble. Right? You go on and on. And so, yeah, I was one of the participants that developed the Asian American hardcore. Right, we started off as a kick band, right, to help brothers and sisters that were trying to get off a smack, right, or pills, right, but who wanted to get it cleaned up. So that we had a place where they could come without being hassled by the man, right, get to kick. And there was another group I was a part of that just wanted to, make the lives of the East things. We couldn't. We thought about trying a health program, health clinic, a food program, and all that. It takes a lot of resources and insurance kind of crap they were throwing at us. So we just organized stuff, jaunts, right, to the wildflowers and stuff like that. But yeah, that's how I got started. I just, I wanted to do something, and so we did it. We just started doing things. Right? We didn't wait for nobody to tell us it was okay, or wait for money and none of that other stuff, right? So that's my story. I just I wanted to do something. I wanted to count, and the opportunity was there. So I participated with other people, right? That we all were trying to become somebody. Yeah. So that's how I got started.
Thank you, Mo. Next would be Eddie Wang. Same question, please.
Hi, thanks for having me today. Well, I'm a little younger than Mo. I'm 70. I grew up in Hollywood, where my dad and mom ran a small laundry. And most people don't realize, but LA was a segregated city in those days. And we could not buy a house in Hollywood. So we lived in the back of the laundry until I was like 7, and we finally found a place. But it was growing up in that kind of environment, with the civil rights movement coming up. And by the time I got into college, it was like fall of 1968, and a lot of stuff was happening about primarily for us, the fight for ethnic studies and trying to form Asian American studies at UCLA in conjunction with the Black students and Chicano students, Native American students. So we had sit-ins, we had a long fight for ethnic studies. And out of that, I got involved also with Ghidra newspaper, which is a student-run community paper that started at UCLA and then went into the community, went into the Crenshaw district. I got interested in filmmaking through an affirmative action program at UCLA called Ethno Communications. And then I helped with other friends like Bob Nakamura and Dwayne Kubo, Alan Ohashi. We all formed this group called Visual Communications, which exists to this very day. And in fact, they have an online free film festival going on now. So just go to vcmedia.org and you can sign in and look at a lot of the works that have been made over the past few years. But what I want to do now is I'd show a short clip of a film that I made based on some of the photographs that we took at Visual Communications. And this event is the Van Troy Anti-Imperialist Youth Brigade. And it kind of like, for me, it was a collective effort, like 5 or 6 people shot stills at that demonstration. And then I went back and interviewed some of the people who were the key organizers of that demonstration. But to me, it demonstrates that 2 things. One is that the war in Vietnam was a flashpoint for all of us. I mean, every day in the news, we saw people like us being killed, mutilated. We knew that also there was racism in the US too. And so that became an organizing point. The second thing was how young people were. Young people got up and did something. And at the Nisei Week Parade, which is like the community's pride and joy, to have that was a shocking element to the whole scene, and people were talking about it for months. So maybe we can run a little bit of that clip now, and afterwards I'll talk about what I'm kind of currently working on.
it just seemed wrong. And it wasn't only because they were Asians and Vietnamese people that looked like us, but from my own thing, I knew Nick had gone to Vietnam. I knew that nobody wanted to go to Vietnam. I mean, we were dealing with the lottery still. It was at the end of it. And it just seemed like a wrong war. Your high school age, it's real easy to feel like you can't do anything about anything. It's real easy to, so in a way, even going back to LA High, all the people that kind of got involved were looking for something to belong to that seemed worthwhile.
As soon as we got there at the beginning of the summer, people saying they wanted to have some big Asian American contingent demonstration at the Nisei Week Parade. And people had an idea to call it the Van Troy Anti-Imperialist Youth Brigade. So aside from doing our regular jobs, like every week we'd get all these young people together. Sometimes where I was staying at this place, the West Side Collective, in different community spots. And we'd do education around the anti-war movement. And who was this person, Win Van Troy? What was the significance of that? And we talked a lot about raising the stakes, as there was already an anti-war movement going on for years, but it was all about bring the troops home and stop the war. But we were saying, you know, you're killing Asian people, and they're fighting for the national liberation. So we took a stand that we're supporting the National Liberation Front of Vietnam, which is quite radical at that time. And we also wanted to say something about Japanese militarism during the Nisei Week Parade.
Is that good right there, Eddie? Okay. All right.
Oh, Eddie, you're muted.
If you could run one more minute, we'll have Mary Cow say a few words about burning the flag.
Okay, one more minute, sure.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Looks like some of that electronics went south.
No, it's good. Here we go.
Hey,
Well, the thing I like to tell people is how important that was, that especially for Japanese Americans, to take something like Nisei Week, which is this kind of showpiece, right, to the larger world. And for us to, try and get out our anti-war message in that, especially talking about like the complicit role of Japan, right? At that time, there was the U.S.-Japan Security Treaty that, we had done a lot of organizing around. And, to point out what role of Japan's role in this whole war, Vietnam, because, you don't really hear about it, except you hear that people go there for R&R and this and that. Japan was really strategic in terms of the U.S. really launching that whole thing. And so it was important for Japanese Americans to really kind of step forward and criticize Japan's role in the whole thing, as well as the U.S.
There were a couple of Niseis who went crazy.
Yeah, so anyway, that was a small example. There was so much going on in the LA Asian movement in the 70s. And then some of the other work that VC, we covered the storefront, which is an organizing effort in the Black and Japanese community in the Seinan. There's a lot of work going on in Chinatown around childcare, forming a childcare program. There was an anti-Marcos and effort in Los Angeles. So there's a lot of things happening at the same time. Since that time, I've gone on to do other things, like, work in political campaigns. I worked for Jesse Jackson for many years. I ended up working a lot in nonprofits in the Asian community, especially in cultural and the arts. And today I'm working on an e-zine, which is an electronic magazine. And it's just a forum where people can write about current events. I'm particularly interested in artists and exposing people to some of the great music and art and culture that Asian Americans are continuing to produce. And then later on, I'll talk about one of the reasons why Richard asked me to be on this panel was that I did some research recently on the FBI spying on the early Asian American movement, and in particularly one group, the Asian American Political Alliance. And I can talk a little bit about that later on. But I'll hand it over to Richard and Joe.
Thank you, Eddie. Joe, can you answer the same question? How and why did you get involved in social activism?
Yeah, for sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Joe, and my pronouns are they and them. I am the youngest on the panel. I just turned 29 last week. So feel really honored and humbled to be on the same panel as all these OGs. So I was born in Shenzhen, China in 1992, and I was there until I was 18. So in 2010, I came to the US to study in college. And initially, I had some perhaps overly romantic, idealized vision of what coming to the US means. It felt like, I have some kind of an American dream coming. But after 2014, when I graduated college, I had just come out as being non-binary. And at the time, my visa was going to expire in a year. And I just could not imagine going back to China where trans and queer folks were still really stigmatized and overall essentially shunned like lepers in a way. So I decided I would let my visa expire. What could go wrong? So for until 2019, I lived in the US as a non-documented, documented to a certain sense, but definitely unauthorized immigrant. I was unable to access work opportunities or public services. And this experience being a queer Chinese unauthorized immigrant has really colored the way I think about things like leftism and abolition. So in 2019, when I was fortunate enough to finally gain legal status, I felt a sense of urgency to advocate for and fight for other marginalized folks like myself. And that was when I became a volunteer organizer for CCED, which the full name is Chinatown Community for Equitable Development. So we are a all-volunteer grassroots organization fighting gentrification and building people power in Chinatown. And I think during this period in CCED, the experience has most taught me the importance of grassroots organizing and why it is important to organize on the grassroots level. So Chinatown is a multi-ethnic working class community. It's actually the second poorest community in LA next to Skid Row. So the median income in Chinatown is only a little less than $20,000 a year, and that's less than almost around a third of the $56,000 median income across LA County. So this combination of poverty and kind of an Orientalist allure has made Chinatown in recent years a prime target for gentrification. So as luxury businesses and developers move in, rent is going up and local businesses and local longtime tenants are being pushed out. So this is the context under which our work is taking place in. So the first tenant union I organized with in CCED was Hillside Villa Tenant Union. So this is actually a really exciting moment for Hillside Villa in terms of our fight right now. So Hillside Villa was built with public money on an expiring affordability covenant for 30 years. Basically, the landlord had to keep it affordable for 30 years, and afterwards he could raise it to market rate. And he did. He raised the tenants' rents for over 200% for the purpose of evicting them so he can flip the units at market rates. So little did he know that these 124 Black, Brown, and Asian tenants decided that they were not just going to lay down and give up. So they decided they would start to organize. So since 2018, they've been forming a tenant association, meeting weekly in 3 languages to organize and strategize to figure out how they were going to stay. So before the pandemic, of course, we met in the courtyard. It was really cool. Since the pandemic, we've shifted to a Zoom format. So the tenants right now are demanding that the city use something called the eminent domain to purchase the building in order to keep it permanently affordable. So for those of you that don't know, eminent domain is a power the city has to forcibly buy land from landowner so long as they're using it for public good. So historically, eminent domain has been used by LA City to evict people to build, say, a convention center or a stadium or a concert hall, things that I wouldn't really personally consider public good, but the city claims that it is. So tomorrow, actually, there is a housing committee meeting where the city is going to vote on whether to secure funding to purchase Hillside Villa for this purpose. Now, if we succeed, this is a huge deal because not only will this be the first time LA City will be using eminent domain not to evict people, but to keep them in their homes. Well, but also, of course, we'll be keeping these 124 families housed forever. But also, this will be a very crucial step towards the ultimate goal of having true social housing, because there are about 8,000 other buildings with similarly expiring affordability restrictions in the next 5 to 10 years. So this could be a very promising precedent for their strategies going forward. Now, if you look up this Hillside Villa fight of eminent domain, you will see the name Gil Cedillo a lot. Gil Cedillo is a city council member for this district. And he'll claim that this is his idea, that he really did it, and that's because he's really a friend of the people. But we know that's not really the case, because it was our tenants who did the grassroots work and organized to figure out how they were going to stay. Our tenants did the homework and handed Cedillo this golden idea that could make his career on a platter, right? But even after we gave it to them, the first answers we got was, well, it may not be legal, which we already knew wasn't true. And then he told us, well, we just didn't have the money. But we knew that also wasn't true, because buying Hillside Villa costs $45 million, and that's less than LAPD's weekly budget of $56 million. But even after that, our abuelas, our tenants, would literally have to chase Cedillo down at his public speaking event to demand answers for him to give us updates, because he has not yet met with tenants even once, because he apparently cannot figure out how to set up a Zoom meeting, according to himself. So politicians may take all the credits for change, right? But it is grassroots organizing that actually creates the change. And a similar thing happens within the city's vaccine response to Chinatown as well, because when the pandemic hit, Chinatown had already lost our only hospital and our last full-service grocery store. So the community basically had no resources to deal with the pandemic. And the city refused to cancel rent, even though they knew that the working class tenants who have lost income and work would not in any way, in any world, be able to pay back all their old rent during the 12-month repayment period after the emergency is declared over. So when the vaccine became available in February, our community had already been devastated. In Hillside Villa alone, we had lost 2 tenant leaders over the course of 1.5 months. Wow. So at the time, we knew the city's vaccine sign-up system and megapods were completely inaccessible to Chinatown's Chinatown's elders. So we reached out to the vaccine equity team, and they told us that based on their statistics, Asian Americans were doing very well. So we're not a vaccination priority. And we couldn't believe what we were hearing. So we looked it up, and it turns out that their vaccine equity map did not even collect data from Chinatown. So when we demanded that, hey, we need local mobile units to provide our elders with vaccines, they said, well, why don't you go collect data and demonstrate your needs so that we can present this data so that they will be convinced. And this is really odd, right? Because this is the data that they themselves neglected to collect. And I'm not seeing them asking Beverly Hills, for example, to collect data to demonstrate their needs in order to provide them with accessible vaccination. So we pushed and pushed, and finally the mobile unit came. When the mobile unit came, our mayor, Garcetti, who Chinatown hasn't seen in years, decided to grace us with his presence in the form of a photo op. He thought he would come to the vaccine site and pose as a volunteer, a very incompetent volunteer who doesn't even speak Chinese, to take pictures and help his re-election campaign. So myself and a few other organizers decided, hey, like we have to be there to cuss him out, right? So we went there and held up some signs and tried to interrupt the photo op, and we confronted him about the vaccine response. And guess what he said? He told us, and these were his words, the mobile units were my idea. So by this point, we're seeing a very clear pattern of how our government, this LA's government specifically, this expressly liberal government, right, exploits and abuses our community. So first, they aid and abet the wealthy to devastate working class marginalized communities. This creates a crisis that us grassroots organizers are campaigning against. Next, they cherry pick from the grassroots demands the most politically expedient ones, usually the ones that upset the status quo the least. And finally, when they've done the bare minimum, they take credit for the hard work grassroots campaigns have done and crown themselves the champion of the people. So this brings me to the final point, which is the city's response to the most recent wave, this recent wave of anti-Asian violence, right? Because for Chinatown, violence isn't new. For Chinatown tenants have experienced years of devastation from the economic and structural violence perpetrated by politicians, by landlords, by developers, by the police. And we know that this interpersonal violence is bred by the structural violence, and it is structural violence that Chinatown community has been calling for an end to for a long time. We've been long been demanding rent cancellation, for example, for truly affordable housing, for community resources, and for defunding the police. However, instead, what we got was that the city deciding that they want to put more cops in Chinatown in order to keep us safe. So now cops with guns are doing photo ops with local businesses in order to rehabilitate their reputation. And private security hired by the business improvement district are harassing house folks in front of luxury apartments in order to sanitize Chinatown's image. And what is the result of all of this? On April 4th, the 5th day of the Derek Chauvin trial, Hillside Villa hosted a rally in front of the LAPD headquarters in order to demand the city defund LAPD and purchase Hillside Villa. On their way home that very night, a group of tenants came upon a cop literally kneeling on an unhoused neighbor's neck. When our tenants pulled out their phones, our mothers and daughters yelling at them to stop, a cop car whipped back and a row of cops filed out of cars, drawing their batons on the tenants. One cop chased down an elderly Chinese tenant who had already walked around the corner and drew a gun on him. Think about this. In the name of keeping Asian Americans safe, an elderly Chinese tenant who has lived in Chinatown for over 50 years was made to stare down the barrel of a gun. So within the Asian community, we need to fundamentally rethink our response in this moment of crisis. Do we ask for increased policing around hate crimes to the detriment of our Black, Brown, and Indigenous brothers and sisters? Do we leave it up to politicians whose only interest is to exploit our sufferings to their own gains? Do we count on wealthy corporations and nonprofits to save us with charity, so long as we are still the topic of the week? Or do we stand along all marginalized people to tear down every oppressive structure that exists? So if there is one takeaway I want to leave you all with, it is to organize on the grassroots level. You must join the local workers union or tenants association, and if there is none, go form one. Build relationships with people in your community. Show up the front lines of protest. I mean, don't get me wrong, scholarship is really valuable because without critical thinking, we wouldn't be able to know all of these new directions and possibilities that we now know exist. And nonprofits and corporations with their money can do some good in the short term, even though in the long run, they may not be able to fully tear down capitalist patriarchy. And politicians, I believe they still have the potential to not be totally awful. I am still holding out hope. But true social change always is born on the grassroots level, because until all of us are safe, none of us will ever be truly safe. Thanks.
Wow. Thank you all. Man, that was very inspirational. And even we've only are in 30 minutes. I wish we had a lot more time, but man, you're already shattering all these stereotypes, right? About Asian Americans and what our role has been, what we do, and the struggles that exist in our community. So thank you for all of that. Again, I just wish we had so much more time. So we're going to be opening it up to questions from the audience pretty soon. I'll just have maybe one or two before I open it up to questions from you all. So send it to me if you have a question. So here's another one for the panelists. So since the 1960s to the present, the universities and colleges, as well as the community, have been the sites of movement activism. What was and is the interplay between the academic institutions and the community? And I wanted to start with Mo on this one. So Mo, were there differences in activism in the streets by the organizations such as Yellow Brotherhood and Asian American Hardcore, which often were made up of members of the so-called street? Could you speak on that, Mo?
Yeah, we didn't have anybody that was particularly, student that was doing all that, although, most of the people were educated youth, right? Who had gone to college, maybe had a degree or at least gone and said the hell with it and went back to the community to work. So yeah, but I want to address that because see the student movement and ethnic studies got co-opted way back early on, when they had a conference in San Jose when who's that guy that mayor went all the way up to being some kind of minister of something or another. But yeah, at that conference, they decided which way they wanted to go, because the question that was posed, right, was do the university serve the community, or does the university, stress academic studies, academics, like write that paper or write that book, and that becomes the main thing rather than what they were supposed to do, right? In both San Francisco and Berkeley, right, both student strike wasn't just about ethnic studies. See, that's another co-optation that's taken place, right? The struggle there was a demand, right, to take the resources that Asian students pour into the university system and give some of that stuff back to the community, right? That's how, community centers in J-Town and Chinatown, right? One of the groups that I supported that I really liked, right, was the movement for young people in Chinatown, right? It was called the Free University of Chinatown Kids, right? Unincorporated, right? Fuck you, pretty tough group, it was pretty interesting. But those kind of investments back into the community stopped, right? And you don't see anything that what the university is supposed to be doing except people writing books, running around, right? Interviewing and stuff like that. So that's, you got to do that, but the aim, right? What is the aim of that, right? So that, yeah, or there's a lot of stuff that I hear, right, of people want to work in the community, but it's that they don't pay or there ain't no money. Well, okay. That's why we formed groupings, right? We had, when I was growing up, right, we had 3 or 4 collectives, right, on the west side, right, where groups of young people got together, right, rented a place, chipped in to pay the rent, and like the community workers collective that I was a part of, right, we had the community took care of our rent for a couple of years, and then we, then we had an agreement amongst ourselves where a couple of them would work full-time, contribute that money to the house, and the house, all the bills were taken care of. So you cut loose about 5, 6 people, right? Other people to do full community organizing, right? Instead of having to do, scramble, right? So that, of course, you had to live collectively. You had to learn, give up a lot of ego and other kinds of stuff. But I mean, to me, that was a look at the future, right? That we have to live and work together. So that was a cool experience.
Right on. I see some questions coming in, and so I'm trying to see. Let me see. I'm going to ask Eddie though a question, and Joe, and then I'm going to open it up because I'm seeing questions coming in privately to me as well. So Eddie, what inspired students to leave the college campus to go into the community to serve the people? Because I'm sure there's a lot of students that are wondering about that right now.
Well, I think that Mo's right. It was sort of built into the formation of Asian American studies in the beginning. Like at UC Berkeley, there was an Asian field office that was set up in Chinatown. And then many of the students who went there started a garment workers co-op. They had a childcare co-op. They had a bookstore. And then even at UCLA, people went into like Chinatown, Little Tokyo, and to do service projects, et cetera. But the problem was it wasn't sustained. You know, a lot of good people started those programs, and then people, I don't know exactly why they stopped. You know, I think that Mo's probably right. There was a choice that institutions make to please the academic side versus the community side, and that was not a good bargain. But I have to say also that many of the people who were activists in the movement went into professions and became worked in social service, became people's lawyers, they became teachers. And so, people did try to stay to their community roots in a lot of places. But the level of work that is needed to transform things is so vast that it requires so much more than what the university or even individual students were able to do. So I'll kind of leave it at that.
Thank you. That's great. Joe, what is inspiring the students to leave the college campus to go into the community to serve the people today? If you could speak on that. I think you spoke on some of it already, but.
Yeah, no, I did. And I don't know if I'm the best person to ask about this because I did not graduate I did not leave campus to enter into activism. It was rather growing out of my experiences after I left campus. But from my experience, when the people I know, it's not necessarily this direction, right? Because the question makes it sound like the campus is not a locus of activism and students must somehow be inspired to leave it and engage in it elsewhere. And I feel like right now, especially within how connected the world is with the internet is, like a lot of our organizers are simultaneously at school as well. And we're actually very intimately working with different research programs, such as when UCLA and volunteers coming from UCLA. And I feel like that's an exchange. And also, I think the campus itself is also a very important side of activism as well, with like the labor that is involved in the working of a campus, such as graduate workers organizing. I think that's also extremely important.
Excellent. Thank you so much. It relates to a question. What you're saying right now, Joe, relates to a question from the audience. And this was directed to Mo and Eddie. So either of you, if you could please start, what do you think the differences are between activism today and back when you started? So either Mo or Eddie, whoever wants to start on that one.
I'll defer to Mo.
Yeah. Oh. Go ahead, Eddie.
No, Mo, you go first.
Okay, go. Mo. Thanks, Eddie.
Yeah, okay. I think in the 60s and the 70s, man, there was this turmoil all over the world, right? And particularly here with the civil rights movement and the anti-war movement, right? And people were questioning. So, although the student strikes and the stuff that was going on, the overwhelming majority of Asian students were still got their nose in the book, right? But there always that percentage of people that gonna go by their heart, right, rather than what Mama said, right? And so. Yeah, I think we're reaching that point now, right, in this country, especially with the Black Lives Matter demonstrations and all this other stuff that's going on with this thing with Trump. People need to analyze what the hell that represented, right? And then this worldwide war that this country, there's this continuous war, so that more and more people are becoming aware. So I think we'll see that kind of activism. I think. Take a quantum leap, right, up. But yeah, I think right now it's unless you got a personal stake like Joe, right? And if somebody's messing with you directly in the 60s and the 70s, early 60s, right? I mean, they were messing with us directly, right? I mean, segregation was the law of the land, and there are places you could go, you couldn't go, so that, it is right there. So, yeah, so people had to confront that, right? I don't think they were confronting that now on a clear basis, because the social investigation and the conclusions that coming from social investigation are not being popularized, right? So we don't know what kind of problems people are facing out there, right? We know they're facing them, right? Capitalism does not let you go free, right? It's going to take some shit off your hide, whether you like it or not, right? And we need to start talking about that,
Thank you, Mo. Eddie, please.
Yeah, well, I think there's there's both similarities and huge differences. And one of the big differences I see is that, one, Asian Pacific Americans are like 22 million people in this country. We were like 1.5 back then, so we have a lot of numbers we can deal with, and it's a much more complex thing. But also there's a lot more use of social media and connectivity, which leads to a form of activism that makes you personally sign a petition online or go to a webinar or even show up to a rally. And that's kind of the end of it. And it's not really organizing for power. And that's, I think, the thing that we struggle with the most in the 60s and 70s is, how do you organize people to achieve power? And that also required political study and understanding how capitalism works, et cetera, and also working collectively. So some of those things might still be needed today, but the overall similarity is that, millions of Asian people are woke now. I mean, because of the anti-Asian hate, for one thing. I mean, it's just for some people, it's like a giant wake-up call that no matter how much money you have or how much education you have, you are still hated as a foreigner, and you are still restricted by white supremacy. So the question becomes, how do we overcome that today? Who are we fighting with and who are we fighting against? And so it's the same questions that we asked back then, but the answers are probably more in alignment with a different situation where we're killing the planet, for one, and we're in a race against time to save the resources of the planet and all the people, so that we have to enlarge our perspectives on how to achieve this change. But that's really where it's at still, is what do you do with the sense of the need to create some change? And we know that the current system isn't set up to make those changes. In fact, it never has been set up to make those changes. So what can we do to replace those systems?
Thank you. There are a lot of private messages, questions coming in, but those are great responses. A couple of people, I told them early that they can speak directly to the speakers, as we would normally in the auditorium setting. And so I'm trying to find the name. I think it was Jerry Rayburn. I'm scrolling back up. Did you have a question, Jerry?
Yes, hi. Yes, I do have a question.
Hey, Jerry.
Specifically about Chinatown's CCED's relationship and how they're organizing, and as far as how they're going to achieve whatever they wish to achieve in terms of making Chinatown to thrive, right? So they seem to have a conflict with Chinatown bid, right? So open development increases neighborhood business activity, increase local economic development and employment. So when you have open development, it can increase businesses activity and increases the tax base. And that tax base can be funded for various social projects and social revenues. So I don't see what the problem is with economic development and working with businesses and corporate partners to enhance the community to make sure that everybody's better off.
Okay, very good
What's
question,
the issue with George Yu and Chinatown's bid.
Okay, I'll
This
let Joe respond to
gentrification is
that.
not really the problem. It's something else.
Okay, thank you. So Joe, did you want to respond to that, or I could respond if either?
Oh yeah, I mean,
Go ahead.
maybe we can both respond to this a little bit. I think this is a very common question that we get when we talk about business improvement district, in terms of people feel like, oh, business improvement district creates more economic opportunities, creates more tax revenue, and then that somehow helps local community. In our experience, that is often not the case. Well, the issue with the business improvement district that we experience is that, number one, business improvement district is not something that a local community has demanded or has elected, so it's not accountable to the people. And number two, the business improvement district is primarily interested in attracting a particular kind of business and creating a particular kind of Chinatown. And this kind of business at Chinatown, generally speaking, is serving wealthy white consumers or workers that don't already live here, that want to come here to consume or to entertain and then leave. And at the same time, the things that they provide are not what our community needs. Not only can we not afford them, we don't need those things. And at the expense of those things moving in, the local community, the things that we actually need, such as grocery stores, such as local businesses, and such as affordable rent, we are being priced out of it. And in addition to that, in order to create create a particular kind of middle class aesthetic and sensibility, what ends up happening is that the BID directly hires private security guards that patrol Chinatown that are also unaccountable to the community. So we found that our community members, elders, and unhoused folks and street vendors have experienced an increased level of violence and harassment since the BID's formation. So these are just a few reasons, not to mention the corruption on the BID board that is very well publicized, of how it mostly consists of luxury developers. So those are just a few things. Would you like to add some, Richard?
You hit a lot of
Yeah, Richard, I'd like to respond to that too.
Okay, sure. Go ahead, Mo.
Yeah, because I live in Chinatown.
Yeah, I know.
I see all that bullshit going on. But I think all you have to do is way back in the early stages of the redevelopment, right? The city big shots, right, laid out a master plan for the downtown LA, and Chinatown, the Placita, right around the church, and J-Town were designated as amusement centers, right? And so we formed, anti-redevelopment kinds of stuff to fight for, hopefully, housing and jobs and stuff like that for our people. And what was the consequence? Okay, here we are, maybe 50 years down the road, and what's happening? Right, the Placita, they wiped out the housing completely. There ain't no housing down there on the old Macy Street no more, right? I mean, what the hell is that about, right? You go down there and hey, you're gonna dance for pennies, right? So these tourists can come by there. You go to J-Town, right? What is J-Town now? It's a tourist center, man. There ain't no goddamn working class people living down there anymore. It ain't got no soul down there anymore, right? And that's what they're trying to do here, right there on Sunset Boulevard, right? They got all this huge ass development going on, and it don't benefit us at all, right? We have, our people ain't getting no jobs, right? Making those goddamn places, right? So there's this cat talking about gentrification and working with them. Wonder how you want to work with somebody that's out to do you in. And you look at the consequences of what the hell gone on, and your answer will come on, bro.
Thank
they
you, guys.
ain't doing it for us, right? They ain't doing it for us, right? Chinatown, right? J-Town, Macy with the old Alpine is part of Chinatown, right? Those are all port of entry communities, right? So that it's always known to have, housing that was available, a place where you could acclimate yourself to what the hell is going on, looking for work and stuff like that. All that's right. disappearing. The only place where there's some semblance of that left, right, is Chinatown, right? And maybe if you want to go out a little bit broader, you can go out to Boyle Heights, right?
They're going
On the corridor there. But you gotta look at that. You just look at the history of what these people tell you why they're doing something, and then, right? They didn't just invent this stuff right now, right? They've been at it for about 30, 40, 50, 60 years, and you see the results, right? More homeless people, right? People out of work, you know? So how can you work with people like that? And they don't even acknowledge your existence anyhow, right? Hey, what the hell?
Thank you, Mo. We have a lot of questions, so I'm gonna move to George. Had a question. George Castillo.
Thank you, Professor, and thank you, panelists. I appreciate you all being here. I want to address this question to Mr. Suchiya.
Oh, that's Mo Nishida. The name is different there, but yes, go for it. That's Mo.
Thank you. I didn't want to, because I don't know him directly. I didn't feel comfortable calling him Mo. But
That's good. It's okay.
Thank you. You've lived and seen a lot of things. You mentioned that you're a survivor of the Japanese, the camps during World War II. You've seen a lot. How do you, and contrary to us who, a lot of us who can only have an opinion of certain things, can only read about certain things, but you've lived through it. How have you been able to not become completely pessimistic about American society? And how have you continued to stay motivated in your work to create social change? Thank you.
Good question, brother.
Good question.
What is my philosophy? I'm a revolutionary. I'm straight up front revolutionary. Capitalism ain't doing the trick, right? My conclusion is that the reason why we are on this planet, right, is the survival of the species, right? We have come to a point where we are the dominant species on this planet, and our job is to stay alive and enjoy that dominance, right? Enjoy those numbers. Well, right? Capitalism ain't doing it, right? Neither could slavery, neither could feudalism. Capitalism sure as hell can't do it, right? Look at these suckers, right? 1% is going to take us and down the whole species, right? Just for a lousy buck, right? So yeah, so to look for solutions, right? You have to get back to your own spirituality too, right? If you don't have a spiritual basis and a connection to Mother Earth and your ancestors, man, you ain't nobody. See, that's what the ruling class has done to us, right? Separated us from the Earth Mother that produced us and our ancestors, right? Think old people, well, the hell with them, right? They're old and useless now, put them in a home or something. Right, do that, all that stuff, right? And if you look at society, you see who are the most vicious victims of this system, right? Small kids and old people. Right? But now, what kind of system is that? How can you live with that? Right? So yeah, look to your heart, bro. Right? It's there, right? You ain't one of them. You know what I mean? So yeah, and there's a whole lot of us working to build a better world. So come on, let's get it on, Thank you for that, bro. Thank you.
Thank you. Another question. This one, Eddie kind of touched upon, but if anyone wants to speak on it, what do the presenters think about the role of social media in activism today? I think, the strengths, the weaknesses, the limitations, if anyone wants to take that on.
I'll do that. Let me
Go for it, man. Go for it, Mo.
Let me put my 2 cents in.
Okay.
Yeah. See, I think you have to understand how capitalism works and what is its main goal towards the people that it exploits. Right? And the main goal is to isolate your ass so you become a stone individual, right? And how much power does one person by themselves have? Right? You ain't got doodly squat, right? But when people get together, right, that's what the unionism is about, right?
Mhm.
People getting together, then yeah, 2 people, 4 people, 16 people, right? You develop strength from that. So that's what that social media stuff is about, man. It's about isolating people, right? Getting to you text somebody, and that's the basis of friendship, huh? Okay, maybe now for some people, but you should see through that shit real quick, like, right? And I think the main thing is what Mao talks about, right? As the basic link of human society. That's mass line, man. Get out there and start talking to people. Find out what other people are thinking. What do you think? Share your views, right? Create democracy, right? They ain't gonna give it to us. That's what that social media and all of this computer bullshit is all about, right? It's about, right? It's got positive points, but it ain't all positive, and you got to understand what they're about, right? They're about to make profit. They're about to isolate your ass. They're about, right, that you're gonna be and feel helpless.
May I jump in?
Yes, please, Joe.
And say a couple of points.
Please.
Well, I personally have a slightly different experience or viewpoint on the role of social media within social justice. I personally don't feel like social media is necessarily an isolating thing. I think it's more about a different kind of community and connection, something that I think all of us have come to know pretty well since the pandemic, that doesn't necessarily rely on kind of in-person contact, but rather through a different kind of online experience. In CCED's case, and through social media, we've actually, it is an important tool for us, whether it is to send out flyers to have people come to our actions, or to get people to call in to submit public comments on city council meetings, or simply to share our progress with the people who are following our different sites. So that has been important. I actually feel like social media right now has a really important role in radicalizing and politically educating folks. I know plenty of people, myself included, have learned and radicalized plenty through TikTok since the pandemic. And I actually feel like it's kind of incredible the way TikTok structures the way you search knowledge, not passively sitting in a classroom for someone to just dump the knowledge on you, but rather it follows your interests and you can engage with people that you're interested in and hear their conversations, and while you continue to explore. I think the issue is that social media is an important tool, but it does not replace the function of grassroots organizing. So social media itself does not accomplish the goal of grassroots organizing, and you have to translate that somehow to the next level. And of course, because social medias themselves are fundamentally money-making platforms, you're still bound by certain limitations, such as the algorithm, as we all know, has largely suppressed many POC, leftist, radical, queer content creators. And so what the algorithm gets you and what you can see on there is still regulated by that money-making mechanism. So it is still extremely limited in that way. However, that does not mean that even within those limitations, it doesn't serve a very important function in educating, radicalizing, and in a way like furthering our movement and connecting more people to it.
Nice. Thank you, folks. Eddie, did you want
Let
to
me respond to that, Richard. I didn't want to make it seem like I was down on social media, okay? Everything is dialectical. Everything has positive and negative factors, right? And it's up to us as thinking people to be able to understand, analyze, and understand it, how it affects us, what side affects us. Yeah. I mean, we're thinking people, so we could take advantage of anything they throw at us and turn it into some positive for us. But we shouldn't think that, yeah, oh yeah, because of that, they're good guys. You know, bullshit.
Thank you, Mo. So it's a tool. I love it. Eddie?
No, I just think that we haven't really even fully explored all the platforms and how they can be used. I think, for example, during the last election, I mean, so many people were mobilized through online groups, whether it was Swing Left or, whatever group was involved in getting out, volunteers to get the vote. And it actually, through groups like the Working Families Party, you could actually learn about what people were doing in different states. So those are really important things that wouldn't have been possible without social media. But I think the challenge is that we're at the point now where the movement needs to grow intellectually. It needs to have like more of a focus and platform and kind of a perspective. And that's going to involve like understanding politics a lot deeper, and whether we need to fundamentally change the Constitution of the United States and deal with corporate power straight up, or how do you institutionalize radical reform within the framework of a quote unquote democracy? These are really tough questions, because these are questions that we could not answer in the 60s and 70s, because we felt that it was just going to be a matter of proletarian revolution, and we know that didn't work out that way. So we need to have different models and different ways of engaging in those debates right now. And I think in some ways, social media will be one platform by which we can begin putting forth some of these ideas.
Thank you. Still got a lot of questions, but I've got to ask this one because it's already 6:11. And so it goes back to the article that you wrote, Eddie, about the FBI surveillance on the Asian American movement. And I know some students, at least my students, wanted to hear about some of the key points that you made in your article. Like, why were they spying on the Asian American movement of the 60s and 70s?
Well, I think the point is that, and part of why I wrote the article is that the authorities will spy on any movement that is making waves. And I think probably to this day, like the LAPD has a long intelligence service background. They're probably spying on CCED now, And what I learned in the course of doing that research is that some people who are actually in the movement itself actually end up, for different reasons, reporting on the activities of what's happening in the movement. And so whenever movements challenge power, power will resist that. And so in the case of the Asian American Political Alliance, which was formed in 1968 and lasted to 72, they were explicitly allied with the Black Panthers. They were explicitly anti-war and support the Vietnamese. And because of the anti-communism that was really in the FBI and in the government itself, and its director, J. Edgar Hoover, there was a concerted effort to gather information on the Asian American movement, to the point where it got to be kind of ridiculous. Like in Los Angeles, for example, FBI agents went out and interviewed Buddhist ministers, heads of banks, and they kind of implied that you are now, going to tell us what's going on, right? And then they would write these reports to Hoover and say, we now have like sources in like 45 organizations. Well, I don't think those people really thought they were necessarily informing, but that's the insidiousness of the surveillance culture. And that's something we still have to watch out for today. But the main point I was trying to make is that when you resist and fight for change, they are going to be on you, and that should not stop you, because they have a very faulty method. And that is, they want to find the quote unquote leaders of any movement. And they feel that they can get to the leaders, then the movement will die. And, they don't understand that there are leaders because people follow them. People actually support what they believe in, and they will fight for them, for those ideas themselves. And so don't be intimidated by the fact that there will be surveillance, there will be repression. Just keep building the movement, because the movement doesn't rely just on the leaders.
Thank you. Mo, I have a question. So I was reading this book by Laura Pulido, Black, Brown, Yellow, and Left, Radical Activism in Los Angeles, and you're quoted in it. And so there is a quote here attributed to you. It says, "We are people with no identity except the white man's, and the only place and ways you could find your identity was to serve the people in our respective communities." Can you expand on that quote? Because I know this is a big issue for many people in the community, like the sense of identity, right? Please, Mo.
Yeah, well, it's a revolutionary nationalist response, okay? That all of us have history. We come from some place, somebody, and some parents. So that, and generally speaking, that's who we were. And back then, we were coming out of segregation, so you came from a segregated community. So that was who you were. So that was where you should go. Would be most right knowledgeable about how to, people to contact with. So that's what that was about. I was talking to Laura, right, about being okay with yourself, right? That's a part of that, right? A lot of us we have this kind of shame, self-hatred kind of thing that comes from the racism, right, and white supremacy in this country, and so that all of us got hang-ups. So that's why you need to get into your roots. I mean, it's like for myself, I just finished up the 29th Little Toki to Manzanar, spiritual unity and prayer run. And that was for me, right? In '69, when we decided to go to Manzanar and celebrate, right? And look at the place, right? And experience it, right? We turned flipped it on its head, right? In the community at that time, right? And when we did it, they called us all kind of names and stupid and troublemakers and why dig up the past, right? We need to go forward, blah, 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 blah. And right, people are still sick, right? We know what that is now, right? That's the post-traumatic stress, the intergenerational post-traumatic stress, right? And all of us that are alive today carry some of that. If we're non-white, we carry some of that. White people do too, but it's a different kind of oppression that they have to deal with. So, yeah, that's what that deals with, that specificity of who you are and where you came from. Yeah, does that clarify that a little bit?
Yes, no, that's great. Thank you so much, Mo. I'm reading comments that are coming up and questions. And so there was a comment about the Asian American community not being a monolith. No doubt that's for sure. We are made up of many ethnic groups, religions. What we often overlook is even social classes, right? So when you think about it, like myself, I got a lot more in common with a working class, middle class person of any race than I have with an Asian American of the top 1%. And so when the question came, what is the Asian American movement? It would be that movement, like the Black Power movement, Brown Power movement, and the Yellow Power movement, this struggle, right, for social justice. But related to that, I have a question that was asked. Let me see if I can find it. So we often hear the phrase Asian Pacific Islander community or communities, but we often don't critically examine what this means. What are some challenges to our very existence in the United States? Because I think this is something that's a challenge right now as we are being attacked by hate crimes. This notion of who we are, the stereotype of the perpetual foreigner comes into play, and there might be perhaps eagerness to assimilate or integrate. And so wanted to ask you guys, anyone could take that on. So what are some challenges to our very existence in the US as a broad Asian Pacific Islander community or communities, plural?
I'd like to, I hope I'm not talking too much for.
Oh, Mo, can I get Eddie first? I think Eddie was leaning in, and then I'll come back to you, Mo, and then Joe too. Right. No, it's great, Mo. Thank you so much for all the wisdom. Okay, Eddie, go for it.
Well, I think it's a really tough question, but I want to point out there's a caste aspect and there's a class aspect. And what I mean is caste, as I see it, is broadly all Asian-looking people are grouped in a certain way. And that's a big factor of what's going on in the anti-hate crimes and the swearing at people, the beating of people. You look Asian, you're blamed for the virus. Boom, end of story. It doesn't matter if you're rich, poor, whatever. But there's a class aspect, and that is that if you're working class, then you suffer along with all the other people of color and working class people. And the danger here is that we're losing our resources. We're losing access to healthcare, access to employment. Automation is going to be a big deal in the coming years. And what is the economy going to look like when there's, different kinds of work that are needed but are not funded, like social service workers? So there's broader economic questions that deal with the majority of the people. But the caste aspects will always be there too, because if racism just won't go away with society changing. Racism is based on a whole bunch of ideas and structures based on white supremacy. That won't change without a lot more education and a lot more resistance. But think of it as caste and class. And then that, for me, that's a vehicle to try to figure out where are the dangers and where are some of the solutions.
Thank you, Eddie. Mo, and then Joe, if you wanted to add, go ahead, Mo.
Okay, yeah, I think there's a fundamental question that we have to deal with. It's like in the Japanese community, we have this thing where our senior citizens program has been ditched by neoliberals in our community, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's fighting around trying to keep our people from being thrown out. Okay, but I think there are higher questions that have to be dealt with, right? Questions that we haven't dealt with since the war, right? But what is our future, right? And every ethnic group has got to deal with this, right? What is our future in America, right? Are we going to assimilate and disappear, right? Are we going to integrate and eventually disappear? Or can a significant minority of us, right, self-segregate without the right to discriminate, right? In other words, is it okay to be a Buddha-head if you're Japanese, right? Is it okay to be a Buddha-head, right? If it's no, then yeah, we ain't got no rights, right? And until we intermarry and disappear, right, nothing's going to happen. But if we decide, right, I believe that, we have a right to segregate, self-segregate. We have a right to live in compact communities and practice, right, our culture and practice things, right, and fight all the negative bullshit in our culture too, right, to stand up for unity with all people of color in this country, right, and around the world, right. We're the majority now, right. So, yeah, I think this, on the one hand, it's like, Eddie was talking about, right, is that you have these mechanical factors, right, because of white supremacy and racism bearing down on us. But the other side of it is that what is going to liberate us and make us free, right? And if we don't have, we don't feel that we have a right to exist as a people in this country, then yeah, we're always going to feel small, But if you say, following the world, right? So people have been in migration from the beginning, right? After coming out of Africa, man, we just took and populated this whole baby, right? Within, 50, 60,000 years. Man, what the hell, right? So we got a right, everybody's got a right to go wherever they want to go, right? And make a living. So I think, we should stand on that. Yeah, I'm okay with who I am. You don't like me, too bad.
Thank you, Mo. Joe, if you want to expand on that, you can, but I have a specific question for you. If you want to.
Sure, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so how do we unite the API movement with the struggles of other groups today? Like, what are some common areas of struggle that we could unite? Like in the 1960s, we know that one of the most effective ways of combating injustice was for various marginalized communities and our allies to come together. And so we're at a place again where we most definitely need to unite. So what do you see, Joe, as some of the common areas of struggle that we could unite around?
Well, I think these two questions are actually very intimately connected. And I'd like to very specifically address this moment of kind of the anti-Asian violence moment, and when a lot of folks are talking about Asian Black solidarity. I feel like in the reaction to anti-Asian violence, a lot of times policing is framed as a feasible answer because crucial complications or differences within the Asian identity is ignored. Because Asianness is a constructed identity and falls under a very broad umbrella. For example, darker skinned Asians would experience more difficulty with policing than me, for example, as a lighter skinned Han Chinese person. And Asian sex workers, for example, experience primarily violence from the police during the raids. In fact, just 1 year before the Atlanta shootings, a sex worker in New York City named Song Yang died in a police raid, and the community was still mourning her. However, very little discussion, attention is given to this particular intersection identity of an Asian sex worker's demands and needs, so that it is framed as, oh, let's just put more cops into these neighborhoods so that people will feel safer. So knowing that, we see that, okay, so first of all, we need to clearly understand the complications within the API community to see what exactly do we mean when we say Asian. And second of all, I think partly due to that confusion, I think when we talk about Asian Black solidarity, it's very important to find a genuine ground to unite with where we have skin in the game. So I'm not sure if folks are familiar with Claire Jean Kim's like racial triangulation theory. Basically, two axes, x-axis is foreigner, insider, y-axis is superior and inferior. Basically, it maps out the relation of the Black, white, and Asian identity within the American context. So Black folks were on the inferior and insider end. White folks are on the insider and superior end, whereas Asian folks are on the foreigner and in between inferior and superior. So I feel like a lot of times when we talk about Asian Black solidarity, we're only always ever discussing one axis at a time. Like, for example, folks would say, okay, Black folks, we're struggling too, you know, like accept us as insiders, accept us as one of you. Why aren't you advocating for us? This is, of course, deeply misguided because Black folks have been advocating for us, and also is completely ignoring the historical context of the model minority myth being created specifically to use Asians to oppress Black and brown people. On the other hand, there are folks like oftentimes saying, okay, so as a relatively superior group, we have an obligation to uplift Black folks. This is great. However, it has its limitations, right? Because it's still coming from a relatively superior place. And just like how white folks' solidarity with Black folks can have its limitations, like coming from this place of Asian folks are relatively superior than Black folks, so we must have a moral obligation to has its limitations. We need to have skin in the game. So this makes me think about this issue. When we discuss the existence of a superior-inferior structure, we don't say, hey, let's just make as many people superior as possible. We say, let's completely eradicate it so nobody's superior to anybody else, right? However, when we discuss the foreigner insider structure, we never question the legitimacy of the existence of the American state. We always say, hey, let's attain insider status somehow through either aligning with whiteness or Blackness. We never say, why is that there needs to be foreigners and insiders? Why is that the creation of nation state necessitated the creation of in-groups at the expense of out-groups? Especially during this moment of global climate crisis, and we need to realize that we all should strive for universal kinship. We need to fundamentally challenge this entire state order and structure. And this means abolishing all the state apparatuses that implement this structure, which includes the prisons, which includes the police, because these structures stem from the need to brand out groups with a sense of deviancy and first harass them with surveillance and policing, and then put them safely aside somewhere else, whether it's the somewhere else outside of society being prisons or camps. So I feel like contained within the seed of Asianness and what this represents is the radical meaning of abolition, is the fact that if we do want to abolish this structure of insider and foreignness, we have to unite with other groups behind the cause of abolition, behind the cause of tearing down all these oppressive structures that the nation state is made of. So we need to not only challenge the existence of superior, inferior social structures, but the validity and legitimacy of the United States as a nation state as a whole, fundamentally. And that I feel like is ultimately how we can have genuine solidarity with other groups and movements.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. And the timing was perfect. We have less than 1 minute. I wish we had until at least midnight. You know, I really appreciate everyone being here, all the participation. I know not everyone in this room or the Zoom room agrees, and that's okay, right? This is how we grow together through the dialectics. We have to just carefully, objectively, right? Look at all perspectives, all sides, and critically examine the world that we live in. And hopefully we can make this a better place. But I'm going to pass it over to Kevin for any closing remarks or housekeeping, because I've seen some chats coming in about signing in. Maybe they weren't able to sign in. So maybe you could comment on that. Mo, Eddie, Joe, man, I'm so privileged and honored that you guys are here today. So thank you so much for all the wisdom and knowledge that you shared. Pass it back to Kevin.
Thank you so much, Richard. And I want to echo the same sentiments to Joe, Mo, Eddie. I know that you took some time out of your day to be here this evening and share your wisdom and knowledge with us. And on behalf of Glendale Community College, we appreciate you for being here tonight and sharing this virtual space with us. Thank you to Richard for facilitating such a wonderful panel, and to our interpreters and to our captioners and all the members of the committee that has been able to assist. Please, everyone, if you can sign into the chat and complete the post-event survey, I would, and the committee would very much appreciate that. But with that all being said, if you want to stick around for any questions, we'll be here. But other than that, have a great evening, everyone. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.
Have a great evening.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Hey,
Bye,
Bob.
everyone.